I have really seen how when I really try to stick to the rigidity that is within CBT, and I love it, right? But that doesn't always apply to a lot of people. And it really forces them to think a certain way and speak a certain way versus the storytelling. That is just something that you can really channel into certain perspectives. So I absolutely love it. And I think it's something, like you said, can really help people put emotions to experiences. Because so often we have kind of been trained by life to think about other people at all times, and that you shouldn't think about yourself, or you should put yourself last because you want to be selfless. But in this aspect, I think selfishness is a good thing, and it can be a powerful thing. And I believe that storytelling helps navigate them in that process.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Legacy Speaks podcast. I am super excited to have this conversation today with Dr. Ewune Ewane, and we are going to talk a lot about Minds Over Melanin and her brand and everything in relation to mental health. As you know, it's Therapy Thursday, so we are going to just dive right into all things mental health, and I absolutely love having conversations with fellow clinicians. So Dr. Ewune, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited, and I just want to give kudos to you for hosting this platform. It's phenomenal.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So, Dr. Ewune, please let the people know who you are and a little bit about your mental health journey. What brought you into the mental health field?
Okay, so hi everyone. Great to meet you virtually. I am Dr. Ewune Ewane. I'm a counseling psychologist and the proud founder of Minds Over Melanin. And about me, I'm from the great state of Texas, Houston to be exact. I'm currently in Atlanta, loving it in the Georgia Peach area. And mental health for me, what drew me into it, I feel like I have like 3 phases. And so the first one is you just hear about it kind of growing up. People talk about reverse psychology, and it seemed like really fascinating, really interesting. And so I enrolled into an introductory psychology class. And this is kind of where I encountered the real fundamentals of psychology, and I encountered biculturalism. And when I encountered that term, I to this day, I still remember how it made me feel. I felt validated. I felt seen, because my entire life, I've had the experience of kind of balancing 2 dominant cultures. My family's from West Africa and Cameroon, and I was born here in the United States. So I'm constantly juggling being Cameroonian and being American. And I can never put that into words. And so to kind of see something speak to my experience, there's no words to kind of describe how that made me feel in that moment. And I knew this is where I need to be. And what really kind of gave me the roots in mental health was I want to take it a step further. So at that time, this was like the early 2000s, not to date myself, that was more so attributed to people of Hispanic or Latino heritage. And so I wanted to extend that to the African Black diaspora, and kind of recognizing that we are not all the same culturally. We have a lot of diversity as well. And so Black people have the capacity to be bicultural, even multicultural. And so that's what really pulled me into it. It's just feeling seen, being validated, and wanting to extend that beyond myself.
Oh, thank you so much for utilizing your personal experience to expand the well-being of other individuals, especially when it comes to biculturalism or multiculturalism. And with you being a PhD, I'm pretty sure your research is rooted in that particular specialization. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I feel like it's very important for there to be representation within the mental health field and the research aspect of it all. And so can you talk about the research that you were able to conduct over time?
Absolutely. So research is often affectionately known as me-search, and it's just the person really trying to figure out the inner workings of themselves and extending that to other people. And I'm no different. And so being bicultural, I never felt as though I were Black due to the very constricted lens in which Blackness was viewed. And so some of the work that I've done is racial identity development. Really looking at the different stages of what people kind of go through, especially if they're encountering different dominant cultures within their upbringing. So I enjoy doing that and kind of seeing how we navigate differently in response to different stressors. looking at how different cultural aspects can be used as barriers for stress or substance abuse, for example. My current research is focused more on the health disparities aspect. And so in here, I'm looking at how stress is utilized within our bodies based off of our belief systems, for example. So I really try to hit different aspects of life and pull culture into it, because culture is a way of life. It's how we live, it's how we think. And so to kind of disclude that from all the other conversations would be a disservice to a lot of people. So that's something I often do, just like, if we look at this group of people versus another group of people, what are some of the key differences that we see? So that's what I really look into. And that's kind of coming from my personal experiences.
Oh, absolutely love it. There's so many different ways to kind of pull away from that. I remember when I was in my master's program, I had to do a particular project for our multicultural class. For anybody who is looking into the counseling program, you're most likely going to enter into a multicultural counseling course that you're going to have to do throughout your program. And one of the interviews that I did was for individuals who are biracial. And I remember when I spoke to this one particular individual, he talked about the experience of being biracial. This individual was both Caucasian and Black, but identified as Black, but with him having a white mother, just having that experience, not only in adolescence, but even in adulthood. Not only was he biracial, but he was also bisexual. So it was just a very interesting dynamic with that. And I remember when I used to work in the psychiatric hospital space, I asked one of my colleagues, who is white. And I asked them, I was just like, you guys have this extensive background. You guys will talk about your ethnicity based upon well, my mom is Norwegian and Scotland and this, that, and the third. And my father came from Italy and also had Russian parents. They know exactly where their family's from, but they all see each other as white. Whereas for us, we take so much pride in identifying our ethnic background or our specific roots. And so I was wondering, especially when we're talking about the Black experience, what is your experience with working with clients who are trying to develop a greater sense of identity based upon their cultural roots or their racial background?
Oh, that's a good question. That is something I always try to bring into the room, always. It may not always be at the forefront, but I kind of just bring it into the conversation. So I'm just like, tell me about your life. And this is how storytelling really works for me. Because sometimes we aren't really aware of all the factors at play, so to speak. And I see myself as a CBT therapist. However, I firmly believe that there's more than one road to success. And one of the roads that I tend to rely on more specifically is storytelling. Just tell me about your life. Tell me about your mother, your father, your aunt, just going down the list. And, what I found when that happens, that's when people really become alive. Yeah. Where you really give them that freedom to speak about themselves, because most of the time we never do. And so going back to your question, that's where I get the culture from. Because I feel like you said, we may stick to our ethnic identity, but sometimes we don't really know how that works and how we're making decisions, so to speak. And so kind of going back to the roots of that, it's okay, well, these are the messages you received, and this is why you're making some of these decisions, so to speak. And so kind of helping them bring that to the forefront. That's how I kind of play with it, more than sticking to very rigid experiences. So, well, I'm West African and West Africans do this. Not necessarily, because I really try to stay away from overgeneralizing or stereotyping people versus kind of using the storytelling aspect of it. So tell me about your dad, how did this work? And then we can kind of get why the values have been instilled and where it's really coming from, and helping a person put those pieces together. So that's how I really try to work with the culture versus trying to put labels on people. Well, you're this, and this is what they do. Not quite. Versus because of this, these are the things that we've done. This is what I have learned, and this is how I got to the end point where I am now.
Yeah, thank you for taking that approach, because sometimes we have a way of internalizing those overgeneralizations and those stereotypes. And over time, people will receive this messaging, whether it be through media or maybe even family members, or even when we're talking about the concept of destigmatizing mental health. Well, Black people don't go to therapy, or it's a luxury. So, what's the point of you doing that? And so you're empowering the client to break off of those like mental barriers in order to be able to be very immersive in their own experience. I often find like with clients, they have a way of telling their story from a chronological perspective, but struggle with identifying the emotions associated with those specific events. And so taking the storytelling approach, whether it be through narrative therapy or any other form of intervention, it's important to pause and let the client say, hey, I felt like this. I never really realized it until now. And so thank you for taking that approach.
Oh, yes. I mean, it's my pleasure. I absolutely love it. I have really seen how when I really try to stick to the rigidity that is within CBT, and I love it, right? But that doesn't always apply to a lot of people. And it really forces them to think a certain way and speak a certain way versus a storytelling. That is just something that you can really channel into certain perspectives. So I absolutely love it. And I think it's something, like you said, can really help people put emotions to experiences. Because so often we have kind of been trained by life to think about other people at all times, and that you shouldn't think about yourself, or you should put yourself last because you want to be selfless. But in this aspect, I think selfishness is a good thing, and it can be a powerful thing. And I believe that storytelling helps navigate them in that process.
This year has been a whirlwind, hasn't it? And I'm pretty sure that you and your business have had to make a number of changes as a result of the pandemic. But I need you to get really present right now. Let's tap into the here and now in this very moment. When was the last time you truly checked in on your team? As a matter of fact, when was the last time that you truly thought about how you and your team are mentally and emotionally navigating through all of the adjustments that are taking place? But guess what? I'm here to help with that. Hi, my name is Sierra Hillsman, and I'm a licensed professional counselor and certified clinical trauma professional. I work with small businesses and corporations by helping their teams explore their presenting concerns. That way we can increase employee engagement and improve productivity overall. This can be done through in-person or online lunch and learn events, corporate workshops, and organizational seminars. Click the link below. That way you can start to learn how to truly invest in the overall mental and emotional wellness of your team.
Yes. How do you encourage clients to get comfortable with that, right? And so I know we utilize the word like selfish, but I like to look at it as like self-focused, so to speak, because sometimes it's just like we are always doing for other people. But when it's time to put ourselves in the spotlight, it's just like, oh, I really don't know. Like, especially when I'm doing strength-based inventories with clients, and I'm like, tell me about your strengths. What are you good at? What are your gifts, talents, and capabilities? Like, let me tell you about my pain. What you mean? What are my strengths? And so how do you help clients get comfortable with talking about themselves?
I believe it's a storytelling. I really try to use the terminology. So I do use selfish because that's the language that other people use. So I'm like, there's nothing wrong with it. This is self-preservation. So I really try to put it into perspective. So it's not like you're keeping away, but what about you're reserving? You're reserving this for you. And I really try to help lead them to it. So it's like, well, if you thought about it this way, how would that look? What would that be like? And kind of offer that as a perspective. Because like you said, we're trained to kind of view ourselves in a certain capacity in relation to others. Mm-hmm. We're not trained to focus on ourselves. And so really bringing that to their attention, like, okay, this is for you. What do you want? What do you need? And just keep pushing that. And so like, what do I want? I don't know. Okay, well, let's talk about that.
Yes.
And let's really pull that apart. So really just reiterating it until they start to soak it in, like, okay, yeah, this is my time. This is for me. This is what I want. And after a few sessions, they start coming in like, yeah, this is what I'm adding to the agenda. I was like, sounds great. Let's go. Let's do it. So I think it's just taking the time, allowing them the space to feel comfortable, because you never want to push someone into something because that's not why you're here. but kind of just reminding them like, okay, you came here to help yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And even when it comes to the goals, as you know, a lot of people probably come up with goals for other people. We can't control other people. We can only control ourselves. So let's think about this again. So if this problem is an issue for you, how can you navigate that? How can you manage that? So I think it just comes to reiterating the purpose of why we're here, encouraging them, and then also offering different perspectives. Like, have you considered this? Because they probably haven't, because of how we've all been socialized to kind of, put ourselves in the back burner and, put others first.
Yes, thank you for touching on that. Like you mentioned, I find that clients, they come into the office or into therapeutic spaces with the expectation of learning how to deal with their environments or learning how to deal with other people. But then it gets to a point when they start focusing on themselves and how to deal with their own selves, or even to get to know themselves. So in that same vein, like, how has it been helping clients gain a better understanding of who they are beyond the stereotypes, beyond the statistics? And how do you utilize mental health content to help destigmatize their mental health avenues or approaches?
I try to rely on pop culture. I feel like pop culture has many strengths, and one of them is being a conversation starter. Like, this was interesting. What do you think about that? Can you relate to that? And so trying to get my clients to kind of consider themselves and what they're looking for, I believe I try to pull in everyday experiences. It's like, I was reading about this celebrity, or have you watched this show? And they're like, oh yeah. And it's like, well, let's kind of talk about that. So really trying to use situations that they can relate to and that they are readily inserting themselves into. I think it's been really helpful with that.
Good stuff, definitely. So finding things that are more relatable and finding ways to like incorporate that within the session. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. Now let's talk a little bit more about Mind Over Melanin, right? What is the mission behind that platform? What helped you to like give birth to that particular initiative?
So the mission is to make therapy safe for Black and Brown people. And Minds or Melanin is my baby. It is the culmination of my life work. And so kind of going back to what I mentioned earlier, how I wanted to extend the works of biculturalism and extend it to consider that Black people are not monolithic. And that we do have a lot of diversity within the race. And that, it should be considered when the person comes into the room. And within my academic training, as well as my clinical training, I've always found myself being that person advocating for the Black client, trying to educate my peers. In fact, after a few situations, I created what is called cultural considerations for treatment of the African diaspora. And it was a full training for not just graduate students, but my supervisors and their supervisors to kind of consider that there are some dominant cultures, so to speak, within the Black racial identity trifecta, so to speak. And, here's some like similarities and differences. And here's how we can really use that when we're considering treatment or when we're considering diagnosis, especially. And so this really came when I was training at a psychiatric hospital. And every day, you have the round table where you discuss the cases and you discuss, potential diagnosis and treatment plans, et cetera. So we so happened to have a young lady who was from my family's home country. But I didn't say anything, I'm just listening and taking it in. And so at one point in time, we're going down the symptoms. I wasn't presenting the case. I was an observer of it. So they're going down the case. And so they said, she said she's a princess. Then what is she doing here? And kind of just laughing to themselves. And so just to give some background to everyone that's listening, the psych ward, we mainly house low insurance or no insurance, low income clientele. And so that was their question, like, well, if you're this princess, what are you doing here? And so they were leaning more towards some form of a serious mental illness. And she refused to speak to them. So they're like, well, she's defiant. She won't, engage, et cetera, et cetera. So this is where I kind of stepped in. And please keep in mind, I was a graduate student at this time. And so I was like, hey, I'm actually Cameroonian and I would like to speak to her if I can. Let's try to do a reassessment before we proceed. And my supervisor can just, kind of sit in the back of the room. So we went there, and long story short, just asked her some qualifying questions. And one of them was, regarding who the chief was. And she's like, oh, that's my grandfather. And I was like, well, there you have it. Then she's a princess. And so kind of offering that cultural context to the situation really helped save this client from what could have been a very serious diagnosis that she would have a very difficult time navigating due to a cultural consideration. And so from that period, I'm really happy to say the hospital was more mindful of our immigrant population and of different symptoms that we may misdiagnose due to lack of knowledge. So they're like, at one point in time, they would check with me like, hey, we have an African immigrant. Can you just look over everything, make sure we didn't miss anything, which was great. However, I was only there for a year. And so it's like, okay, I'm leaving. What's the next step? And I remember my supervisor kind of asked me, she was like, hey, is there anywhere where I can look up this information? And I was like, no. And so that's kind of where Minds on Melanin came from, is we need something that can help support these clinicians as the audience and the population of the United States is changing every single day. We need to adapt better. Psychology needs to adapt better. And so that's how Minds on Melanin came, because we need to have a space for continuing education that is relevant to multiculturalism. And as you know, when we're in training, there's only one multiculturalism class, just one, 3 hours. And one thing they're doing now is they try to slide it into summer. So it's just a few weeks that is kind of pop in and overgeneralize a lot of cultures. And it's ineffective. Right. And so what we do is, one, we have an advocacy initiative where we're here to provide mental psychoeducation and support people in wellness tips. But the focal point of Minds on Melanin is to support techniques to ensure that therapy or the mental health system is safe for Black and Brown people. And so we do that through two ways. We do that through research, which is supporting minority-focused research studies that every year they go underfunded or they are incomplete due to lack of volunteers. So we kind of created a streamlined approach to support them. And then the next phase, which is coming later in the year, so check in with us for that, is we're going to have a database to support clinicians. So if you have a patient come in that you're unfamiliar with their culture, that's okay. We got you. And you can come on in, do some great reading, and be more prepared to better support this patient and what they need and what they're presenting as well. So that is Minds on Melanin. And our slogan is, as we prepare for therapy, therapy should prepare for us. And that's what mental health should be. Like, as our population is changing, we should start changing too. And that hasn't happened yet, unfortunately.
Oh, I absolutely love every single piece of that. So thank you so much for the work that you do. It is very needed, very much so. I think every time I do some type of presentation about multiculturalism, or maybe even like diversity in the workplace, or how to support individuals of color within certain spaces, I always remind individuals that we are not monolithic. There are so many different aspects to individuals who are part of the African diaspora. And another thing that I also mentioned is, just because we have the same skin color doesn't necessarily mean that we have the same shared experiences. And it's important for people to recognize that and honor that. And I remember when I was looking at your website, you focus on honoring the differences. It is not in a manner that keeps us separate or divided, but in a manner that keeps us connected. Because at the end of the day, like you mentioned, all of these countries are becoming acclimated to the new face of what therapy looks like. And that's so important, very much so. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Because, some of the attempts now due to multicultural needs is, just find a Black therapist. And so I honor that and I support that, but there are some limitations with that. So one, like you said, all Black people are not the same. And so we're subtly, pushing that narrative that Black people are monolithic, because you can just go find a Black therapist and you'll be okay, right? But then the other side of it is, it's a numbers game. we do not have enough Black therapists to support the Black community. We do not. There are 3% of all psychologists are Black, right? And I believe 6% of all professional counselors are Black. There is not enough. And so when we just look at those two aspects, we have to improve the whole system, because there is going to be an occasion where you go to a psychiatric hospital, for example, if you're having an episode, and you may not encounter a Black physician or clinician. And that's okay. You should still receive the adequate support that you need. And even then, we have to think about, this is a system that's still training these Black clinicians that we're relying on. So, the fish stinks from the head. Isn't that the saying?
Yes.
So from that, we have to go back to the roots of it. So we have to rectify the system and, change it in a manner that it lives and breathes in response to the needs of the people that it's serving.
Definitely. And then also creating safe spaces for clinicians to learn more about these aspects, because there's this expectation of, if I ask questions and I'm supposed to be this expert, how dare I not know about my fellow brothers and sisters from West Africa? How dare I not know my fellow brothers and sisters from Chicago, or maybe even Brazil, or things of that nature? And so normalizing what it looks like to ask those questions in order to be better service to those individuals as well. Love it.
Absolutely. It even just speaks to the complexity of people. No matter how much we know, people are so complex and we have so many layers, and you can never just say like, I just know everything about what there is to know about people. No, because as you know, the more you ask, the more you question, the deeper it gets. And so we just need to be mindful that it's not even us being ignorant as clinicians, it's that this is a very complex situation and you will never have all the answers. And just being more mindful of that, this isn't something that's going to happen, I think will help support people and be more open to asking the questions like you mentioned.
Oh, yes. And when we ask questions, we have great conversations like these. So I am super excited to continue this conversation later on in the year when that second leg pops up for you. So you are always welcome back. This is very exciting. And so Dr. Ewane, please let the people know where they can find you and how they can tap into all things related to Minds Over Melanin.
So yes, please come check us out at mindsovermelanin.com. We have blog posts, we have psychoeducation, we have videos. I definitely want to bring attention to Reflections in Color. This is a web series we have that is meant to highlight silent battles that people are going through. We have various topics that we think you would really enjoy partaking in. So currently we have living a healthy life and a happy life with STIs. We've covered a transgender journey. We've covered unexpected grief. So it's walking through different aspects of life and just normalizing that life is hard. And it kind of takes us through the ringer, but there's an upside to it. And we have a pure blueprint provided by these people of how to get there. So we have that. And if you want to find me, you can find me on Instagram as well at Dr. Wusai. So that's WU_PSY. And I look forward to hearing from all of you.
Absolutely. So guys, please make sure that you are tapping in. And as always, this is the Legacy Speaks podcast. And I always ask this question before we end the session. But as you know, it's the Legacy Speaks podcast. What would you like your legacy to say about you?
Oh, I would like my legacy to say that I lived. And that is happy, fully committed, everything I lived. I don't want to just be, I want to live.
Oh, love it. Love it. All right, guys, this is Dr. Ewune Ewane. Please make sure you're tapping in with her as well as in regards to Minds Over Melanin. And this is Sierra of the Legacy Speaks podcast. You can find me at Legacy SBKS on everything. Please make sure that you're staying connected. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share on all platforms via YouTube, social media, and the podcast. Thank you so much. Bye.